Welcome to Watchers TV. This is our first show and we're excited about it. And let's just jump right into it. We just released Watchers 8.
Finally.
And we're really excited about getting that out. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what was in there, specifically regarding Roger's last implant surgery?
Well, Watchers 8 was a bear because there was so much material to edit. We had so much stuff. But it was really kind of a landmark Watchers for us because Dr. Lear, God bless him, passed away in March, which was a couple months after we shot his segment where he did his last alien implant
number
surgery.
17.
Yeah. And it was amazing. I mean, the things that happened during the surgery were remarkable.
Yeah, what sort of blew me away about that whole thing was, and we've talked about this before, but we had a Gauss meter, and that showed about 7 to 7.5 milligauss. The stud finder showed clearly where the implant was on Bill's leg. It showed up on the...
and that's all on Watcher 7.
It's all on Watcher 7. Right. The X-ray, the CAT scan, we know it's there. And then finally the ultrasound.
Right.
And when we went to take it out, all that didn't work.
Nothing worked.
It was amazing.
It was crazy. I mean, we went in there 2 weeks earlier to do a pre-op test with the ultrasound machine.
Found it in less than a minute.
Yeah, just like Dr. Matriciano puts the wand on Bill's leg and bang, there it is. You know, so, oh, I guess, and he even was skeptical at first that he wouldn't be able to find it. He'd go, well, we might find it, he says. And he found it like in a minute. So when we actually go in there with the big setup, 3 cameras, people actually watching the shoot in the other room with a monitor and all of that, and we had the real expensive ultrasound machine, nothing worked.
Nothing worked. Gauss meter didn't work, stud finder didn't work, ultrasound machine didn't work, and then what was great, you know, we were all there, the two doctors, Dr. Lear and Dr. Matriciano, were going, well, maybe we should get another X-ray.
Right. There was talk about that, well, I wonder who's open on it. We did this on a Saturday.
Yeah, I know.
Who's open where we could still do an X-ray, and no one was sure.
And then we got the tap on the shoulder. I said a very short prayer, which went something like this: Father, if there are forces which are cloaking the device, and that's why we call this cloak of secrecy here.
Right.
If there are forces that are cloaking a device, we would ask that you would break that power and do it soon. Right. And under my breath, because there were people in the room, I just said in Jesus' name type of thing.
Right. And
less than 3 or 4 minutes later, all of a sudden the implant. And when you showed it to me the first time, here in this, I was blown away. Tell us about that as it just comes into that. It's like an after effect. It shouldn't be.
In the film, and also to help Roger, we had a little HD monitor in the surgical room, and the actual display on the ultrasound machine is rather small. The screen is like this big. Okay, so Roger's standing kind of a ways from that and was having trouble seeing it. So I said, well, let me put a 300 millimeter lens on my camera and it'll make it bigger. So we did that. So I had this full frame shot of the ultrasound screen on the monitor and was recording that just because we thought we might need it. We also had 2 other guys that were helping us shoot that day, Jeremy and Ruben. But when the device appears, it almost looks like a video effect. It kind of dissolves in. It's just like he's barely moving. The doctor's barely moving the probe on Bill's leg, and all of a sudden this thing just kind of goes.
And from our experience with ultrasound, that's not the way it's supposed to come in. I mean, usually, you kind of go. It kind of comes in this way, like
it slides around through the frame.
Right.
Yeah.
This was like it dissolved into the frame. It was very strange. Very odd.
It was very weird, and I have to say too that simple dumb devices like the Home Depot stud finder thing, which is just a simple tool to see if you got a metallic object.
And it worked before.
It worked before. This time when we stuck it on Bill's leg, it went off everywhere. It was like you couldn't get a reading.
Yeah, and the Gauss meter not registering anything, just sitting there, just at 0.
It registered 0
the whole time, and just incredible.
Yeah, so something definitely. I mean, and the ultrasound machine's many thousands of dollars. It's a no nonsense device. So it
was like the implant was being cloaked by what was chilling to me. We talked about this before. Is there seemed like there were other forces that didn't want this implant discovered and removed. We were being monitored. Like it or not, we were being monitored that day.
Well, there's been this talk for years. What are these implants for? What are they doing? Now it does seem pretty clearly, because of this evidence, that the implants are controlled externally. Somehow they can be switched on and off.
Switched on and off, yeah.
Which is weird because, I mean, they're a physical object. I mean, you ought to be able to see a physical object, wouldn't you think? But somehow we couldn't see it.
And of course, what interests both of us is, in fact, he wrote about this in the new news magazine. The idea of it. The debunkers are always, in their ivory towers or their Monday morning quarterback wheelchairs or whatever, mixing metaphors here. But the bottom line, they're always, poking and saying, well, the science is skewed. You really didn't find it. How do we know? We did this whole thing in a very scientific way.
We did.
We interviewed Bill. And he told us he was abducted. Okay, that's a nice story, Bill. And then we showed us where the implant was, and gee, there it is. And there's no entry wound where the implant was.
No.
And I mean, the story, something is going on. And why the skeptic can sort of rail against it, the bottom line is we're out in the lab, in the field, doing the research. And what the research is indicating and pointing to is that the phenomena is real. It is not illusion. It's not some sort of smoke and mirrors. These implants are real, and we've extracted.
That's true. I mean, this isn't baloney. This is really happening. And we took the implant out, and we took it to the lab, and we did electron microscopy on it. Hard word to say, but it was there, and it didn't look like a bicycle spoke or something like that. It looked very odd. It was very.
And
strange.
the fact that it was switched off, on command, whoever was doing it, unseen forces. When we read about this in ancient prophetic texts, specifically in the book of Ephesians, where it talks about powers and principalities. And that's what we're up against here.
Right.
We're unseen powers and principalities that are shutting the thing down and don't want it taken out. I mean, it was pretty intense in that room.
What most people don't know, and I found out this out later, was that Bill, after having this removed, no longer has any pain occurring in his leg, and he's dropped 20 pounds.
Interesting.
It's very strange.
Yeah. It'd be interesting, of course, we didn't do this and really don't have the resources to do it. Be interesting to take samples of his DNA, let's say prior to the operation,
and then see if anything has changed.
Yeah,
that'd
be
be interesting.
To see if that was. There's a UFO update specifically about the Chilean government releasing footage of a UFO, and the Chilean government came clean and said, "Yeah, we know it's there, and here it is." It's another in a long series of different countries revealing.
They're starting to disclose.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, then in Watchers 8, we also show kind of the latest phenomenon with infrared UFOs, which is really kind of intriguing to me. Like these craft are up there all the time, and they're cloaked in infrared, and we can't see them.
And that was incredible when we showed the infrared clip to Gary Stearman, and we have his reaction. And he's startled. He's taken aback by it. So is Paul McGuire and Bill Salus. Right. Everyone was whoa, what are we looking at there? It's very strange. And Gary Stearman's quote really stuck with me, the idea that they're planning something like an invasion. They're doing maneuvers. They're practicing for something. So I thought that was very
like
telling.
A formation of some sort.
Very telling.
Well, I guess we're about to have Bill Salus coming on.
Yeah, it'd be great to interview Bill.
Which is great. He's got another new book out. I think you have a copy of that somewhere.
I certainly do. And this is going to be fascinating. Nuclear showdown with Iran. And it deals with the Jeremiah 49 prophecy, chapter 49 prophecy with Elam. We're here with our very special guest and our first guest, Bill Salus. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, LA, it's great to be on the program.
Absolutely. Well, the first question we have, where is Elam and why should we care about this?
Well, that's a good question because Elam is not exactly a household word, right? But it's mentioned quite a bit in the Bible, surprisingly. And it is located territorially in the modern-day state of Iran. Of course, that's the ancient name is Elam. And it's where the Persian Gulf is, sort of the central western part of Iran. And so Iran today is primarily comprised of ancient Persia and ancient Elam. Persia was much larger in size and scope. Elam was about 1/6 of the size of modern-day Iran.
And so what motivated you? What's the nexus, the beginning, with this sort of the beginning of the trail, which led you into this prophecy? I mean, this is very obscure, and of course, you've done this before with your Psalm 83 book, which completely turned everyone's paradigm as far as Ezekiel 38 were, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. But I know it changed my paradigm. So, with that in mind, what nudged you along this trail?
Well, you know me, LA. I'm sort of the guy that's looking for those, not necessarily revealed, those overlooked prophecies that I think are very relevant for our time. Psalm 83, of course, was one of them. But as I wrote about Psalm 83, I spent a lot of time in the ancient prophet Jeremiah's book. He had 51 chapters, and chapter 49, there was a whole lot of information in there dealing with Psalm 83. I thought it interconnected. Well, at the end of chapter 49, you have this prophecy. It's 6 verses dealing with ancient Elam, and it's a latter days prophecy, vastly overlooked.
Which comes to today. When you say latter days, you mean present day.
I believe we're deep into the end times, the latter days, and that this is a prophecy that I believe is imminent. I believe it's an event that could happen at any given time. And the reason I think it's very relevant is I think it's dealing with Iran and might even be dealing with its nuclear program.
When you say nuclear program, what are you referring to here?
Well, by the way, let me say this too. Elam is where the Bushehr nuclear plant is located today.
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah. Now, the prophecy itself talks about, in these 6 verses, it talks about Iran fiercely angering the Lord, which in turn provokes a judgment on, which would be Iran now. And the judgment comes to a point where a disaster occurs. And when you look at the Hebrew text, it's a very, very serious calamity. And it talks about being struck at the foremost of its might. It says it'll break the bow of Elam. It's a prophecy that I've found has not been fulfilled yet. We could be talking about the foremost of Iran's might today is its developing nuclear program.
Which leads us right into the Bushehr reactor, which is in ancient Elam.
Right. And then what it says, and it's very interesting how Jeremiah puts it. He says, then the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven will be brought down against Elam, and these Elamites, these residents, will be scattered toward those winds. It says there'll be no nation where the outcasts of Elam don't go. What that means is we've got a worldwide dispersion, an expulsion of the affected people will go into exile from the winds coming down and scattering it. It almost sounds like a nuclear disaster.
I was going to say, I mean, that's what it really sounds like. It sounds like something is cataclysmic has happened over this region, and people are fleeing because they have to flee. Would you concur?
Well, that's what we don't want to sensationalize this, but it really does seem to draw that conclusion. It's the magnitude of the makings of a humanitarian crisis. We're not talking about an isolated scattering, taking some prisoners of war across the border over into Kuwait or something like that. We're talking about a worldwide dispersion that is a result of a disastrous occurrence inside of Iran. And the reason I brought up the Bushehr nuclear plant is that is one of the least monitored nuclear sites on record. And it is built where 3 tectonic plates converge by the Persian Gulf. And there have been studies done that if there was a strike on Iran's nuclear site at Bushehr, which is a very strategic target for any enemy of Iran to strike, it's very exposed right there by the Persian Gulf, or an earthquake, and 90% of Iran is seismic. It's one of the most seismic countries in the world.
Very prone to earthquakes.
Yeah, if one of those events happen, hit the Bushehr nuclear plant, which is loaded with Russian fuel rods as of August 2010, the inevitable conclusion from these studies is a nuclear disaster of maybe an unprecedented nuclear disaster.
Chernobyl, Fukushima, or
beyond
greater?
Beyond that, because of the dangers to the waters over there. You know, that area is very water dependent on the Persian Gulf. Matter of fact, 2/3 of the world's desalination plants that the Arabs rely on are in that area. They've conducted their own studies because there was an earthquake in April of 2013, and their studies concluded that they need to build the longest pipeline in history from Oman all the way running through the Gulf Cooperative Council states, which would be Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia has coastline there, on up to Kuwait, to protect themselves from such a disaster. Also, Elam is separated by the Zagros Mountains there, which is
on the east side, or
on the east side of Elam,
all right.
and they serve as a barrier. So, in other words, a nuclear disaster could happen in Bushehr in ancient Elam, and the way the winds would blow, they would blow everything over toward the Arab states. Tehran might not even be affected, which is important to recognize, because when we talk about this prophecy dealing with Iran, Iran has a double jeopardy in the end times. There's 2 prophecies. Many of your viewers may be familiar with the other one, which it's very popularized, and rightfully so, is that Ezekiel 38, that Gog of Magog invasion. And so much focus has been on that, the Elam prophecy has been overlooked. So whatever happens to Elam,
Maybe this precludes what's
I believe it precedes
okay.
Ezekiel 38. And
Okay, so it's
I
before
go
then,
to,
obviously.
I go to great lengths explaining why I believe that inside the book. But, you know, Iran still has to be intact to join up with Russia in that Gog and Magog invasion. There's, you know, 9 members.
And Iran
together.
is just like Gog and Magog. The second nation is Persia, and that, of course, is modern-day Iran.
Well, let's clarify that
All right.
for your viewers. Actually, Persia is not the second one listed. It gets an honorable mention with Ethiopia and Libya and down in verse 5. Verses 1 and 2 talk about Russia and Turkey. Well, Russia's the number 2 ranked world army in the world. Turkey's number 8, I believe it is. Iran's presently around number 22. But when you get down to the Ethiopia and the Libya down in there, you're talking about ranked and barely in the top 50. I think Libya maybe 58, something like that. And here's Iran nestled in back with them. And the reason I think that might be significant is because if Iran gets struck in this prophecy of Elam and has a nuclear disaster, it could really compromise Iran's Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, their military. Will they really be that formidable Iran that we think going into that Gog and Magog invasion, or will they be more like a Libya or a Ethiopia type army? So see, these are all ground-breaking thoughts that will start to arise as people start to read this new prophecy. It's not a new prophecy, but it's being revealed. Matter of fact, it's not new. It's so ancient it even predates Ezekiel 38. Elam goes back to the time of Abraham, 4,000 years ago. You find it in the book of Genesis, chapter 14. You don't even start hearing about Persia, which is that Ezekiel 38 prophecy, until around 600 BC. That's when they come on the scene with King Cyrus of Persia and things like that. So just to clarify, so we don't lose your viewers, we have 2 prophecies written about the same time by 2 Hebrew prophets. Jeremiah was one. He wrote this prophecy around 596 BC, the prophecy of Elam. Ezekiel, his contemporary, they lived around the same time. His ministry started around 593 BC, about 3 years after this prophecy was written. He then writes for about 10 years, and inside of that 10 years, he gets this major prophecy in Ezekiel 38, that Gog and Magog one. So his prophecy came after Jeremiah's prophecy.
Okay.
And I believe we have 2 distinctly different prophecies, not just more details.
2 different confrontations.
Yeah, not just more details about Ezekiel's.
Okay.
These are 2 distinctly different ones.
You have here is the following. You have here the story to go towards Gog. Perhaps you will translate it in your way. And
Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach, Tubal, and the prophecy against him.
Which in Hebrew, those letters makes the name Obama. Obama. Which no doubt, as we know today, that his impact is definitely goes all over the world. All nations in the world, in fact, are connected with him because he really decides how things will go. But in this case, really, you did not need computer because
Right, it's just right there.
Exactly.
So it's actually in the plain text.
In the plain text.
It's in the plain
text, and also written fully because the name Obama I have here full letters. Really, because Obama can written also without one letter. You see, there is a letter here which is really not necessary. His name really being here with the chief, Nasi in Hebrew is chief, with those nations which coming afterwards. What are the nations?
Meshach, Tubal, Persia, Iran, which is Persia is Iran, Ethiopia, Libya with them, Togarma, which could be Turkey. Let me ask you something. We off camera we were talking a little bit, and you were saying that a rabbinical tradition would be that Gog and Magog can shift.
But the idea is that there are potentials every generation, in fact. For Gog from one side and Messiah from the other side. Amazing. You see, so I said in our time, Ahmadinejad can easily be like a Gog. Because you see, this is what he wants to do.
So with that in mind, Hitler was a type of Gog.
Some say
a chief prince.
Exactly, some say that this one, right? Right.
And we're back. Thanks for watching Watchers TV. And if you're interested in getting these incredible products, which have a lot more information, we've only scratched the surface here, go to the website. It's on your screen now. Bill Salus Prophecy Revealed Package. President Khomeini has stated unequivocally, death to Israel. He says every Friday they get together for prayers, and that's worth a lot of the vitriol. We know that former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad stated Israel was a dry-withered tree, so to be plucked up by its roots and thrown into the sea, and all the vitriol from him. And of course, the new President Rouhani is basically in lockstep with Khomeini and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. With that in mind, we know that Iran is desperately trying to get a nuke. Why, in your opinion?
Right. Well, I think their quest for a nuclear weapon is multifold. One is they do want to shift the balance of power in their favor because they want to spread their hegemony throughout the Middle East. And they want their Shiite branch of Islam theology to be the dominant aspect of
as opposed to Sunni.
As opposed to Sunni for a thriving new caliphate,
Okay.
which they would also like to move in toward Jerusalem, which seems to be the heart city of everybody who wants to start this new caliphate, rather they be Sunni or Shiite. I think also they would try to make good on their threats to destroy Israel, because they do see Israel. There's no, you quoted some of it, there's no lack of venomous rhetoric in the Middle East. Khomeini, President Ayatollah, has called Israel a rabid dog,
Sure.
a cancerous tumor that needs to be wiped off the face of the map. That is why Israel takes those threats very seriously. They want that nuclear program dismantled. They don't want it contained. Whereas the P5+1, which would be your international community,
Sure.
U.S., United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, includes Germany plus Germany, they are trying to negotiate with Iran to contain their program. Now, Iran presently has 19,000 centrifuges, which if they were spinning full time, estimates are they could have a nuclear weapon in 6 weeks. Now, they've only got maybe half of those spinning so far while they're doing the negotiations. But their goal really is to have about 50,000.
Well, let me ask you this, Bill, in regard to the centrifuges. You know, they talk about the inspectors going in and they can see this and they can't. I mean, how the data, the intel that we're getting, how do we know? And I've read this from other researchers. I mean, maybe it's a little off the wall. I don't know, but some are positing that Iran already has the bomb. Would you side on that? Would you?
Well, there is that speculation that they've already obtained one or procured one versus developed one. Some people think they may have already developed one, but from the Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence, it seems to be that they are concerned that they're about to develop one. In other words, they don't necessarily believe there is one just yet. They could have one. One nuclear weapon wouldn't necessarily destroy the nation of Israel, but
No.
it could take out Tel Aviv,
Oh, absolutely,
undoubtedly.
sure.
Now, recently, a high-ranking Israeli intelligence minister said that at this pace of Iran's nuclear program, they could have 50 to 100 nuclear weapons by the year 2024. So something has
That's
to
a game
give.
changer, yeah.
Something has to give. And I think that takes us back to, all the pundits and the news analysts are wondering, well, what's going to happen with Iran's nuclear program? And I think they're looking in all the wrong places and asking all the wrong people. They need to be looking into Jeremiah's prophecy, in my estimation, that we've been talking about in Jeremiah 49. It seems to be talking about a very specific prophecy in a very specific area that leads to the type of a disaster that could be caused by nuclear radioactive fallout. And as we talked about earlier, those studies have shown that is of grave concern to anybody that could be affected by that, especially
That's a
the
game
Arab
changer
states.
in the region, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
This nuclear facility in Bushehr was started in the 1970s, like 1975, by Germany. This was when the Shah was in power, and Iran was very much westernized. But then when the Islamic Revolution happened in 1979, Germany got out of there. And then Iran started to try to build upon those German parts. And then in around 1995, they contracted with Russia to conclude this facility. Now, this facility is built by German, Iranian, and Russian parts. There is no one trained there to handle a
boy.
nuclear disaster like the one in Fukushima. And so these...
Which isn't being handled, but that's another
Right,
story.
but these are very legitimate concerns that if that site was struck, and Russia, by the way, is contracted with Iran to build 2 more sites in the area. So Russia, who's on the P5+1, is backdoor making agreements to build more nuclear plants over there. I just don't think that we're going to see any resolve here diplomatically. The negotiations have failed. Military threats have failed. Iran keeps spinning centrifuges. And I think we could be looking at a prophecy that's about to find fulfillment that very well could escalate into a wider conflict in the area, very well could lead to that concluding Arab-Israeli war described in the Psalm 83 book that you're offering.
So basically, you think, or let me ask you this: do you think that this Elam prophecy is before Psalm 83? And how does that figure? Look, what's going on right now in Syria, Damascus, the Isaiah 17, another prophecy yet to be fulfilled. We see that Damascus is literally being torn apart brick by brick. It makes us wonder whether we're actually looking at prophecy being fulfilled in a way that no one would ever have imagined. I mean, literally brick by brick, the city is beginning to crumble. There are entire sections of it which are no longer there. So where do you place the Elam prophecy in regard to the other prophecies which I just mentioned? And sort of give us a quick little, people tuning in for the first time or not sure of prophecy, and we're just kind of bouncing around here. Psalm 83, Isaiah 17, Ezekiel 38. Just give us a thumbnail sketch of each one, and then where Elam fits with all that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the way I look at these things is I look at what conditions still need to be met as per the specific details given within a prophecy. For instance, the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, the Gog and Magog invasion, Russia puts together a coalition of 9, which would include Turkey and Libya and Iran and several others. That prophecy is not ready to happen yet. And I point that out in the book. Israel has to be dwelling securely, without walls, bars nor gates, very rich, wealthy country. So there are preconditions on that one. That Israel, in my estimation, is coming quickly, but it doesn't exist just yet. Okay. When I look at prophecies like Psalm 83 and Elam, and we'll talk about that one, I look at, are there any preconditions left on that? And there are none. The Elam prophecy, Iran has to fiercely anger the Lord. Well, that's being done on 3 fronts. One is they want to wipe Israel off the map. That doesn't bode well with the Lord. 2, they're worshiping Allah. Well, God, we're told in Nahum 1:5, is a jealous God, and we're told elsewhere that He is the only God. There's none like Him in Isaiah 46. Okay, so we've got 2 strikes against them. The third strike is there's a spiritual showdown going in Iran that I'd like to, when we get time, I want to talk about that maybe in another program. Iran is the #1 evangelical population in the world, so much so that the Ayatollah has had to issue a decree a couple of years ago to close home churches, imprison pastors, and persecute Christians. Strike 3, they are persecuting these Christians. They are throwing them in jail, and in many cases they are killing them. So that's just one of the prerequisites. The other 3 or 4 have all been met, L.A. So to me, this is an imminent event. This prophecy, we could wake up one morning and missiles could be flying in the Middle East, and the Bushehr nuclear plant could be struck because it's in the historic heart of ancient Elam, and you could have a nuclear disaster.
So Israel would be firing the missiles, in your opinion?
Well, okay. Another prerequisite,
They certainly have
Elam
probable
has
cause
to
to
have
do it.
enemies, it says in one of the verses.
Okay.
Plural, not enemies. Well, Iran has enemies. Israel's very concerned. The Arab states, the Sunni states around them
Saudi
are concerned.
Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. The international community is very concerned and has even threatened that they might strike if negotiations fail, because Iran is a global sponsor of terrorism. So, yes, that could be Israel. We are not given specifically which of the enemies causes the disaster, but we are told they do have multiple enemies. So if you want, Psalm 83 briefly is a Arab-Israeli conflict. It's a concluding Arab-Israeli conflict where the nations that share common borders with Israel and the terrorist populations within them, they will come against Israel to destroy it so that they can take the land of Israel. That's the goal of that confederacy. It was written about 3,000 years ago. I'm watching for that one. I think that one's imminent. It's been displaying itself since Israel became a nation in 1948 with those Arab-Israeli wars.
Bill, thanks so much for being here. And folks, if you're interested in finding a lot more about this, and we've really only scratched the surface of where we could go, literally, we are offering the Bill Salus Prophecy Revealing Package, and you can go to a variety of different websites and order it right there. Bill, thanks so much for coming on, and we're going to do another show a little bit later and get more in depth about what you've written. Fascinating.